Hello and welcome. It's Friday. You've made it through another week, and this is the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. A little later on in the show, we've got a chilling new story with Theater of the Mind, a real personal encounter. Some kind of creepy goblin golem creature you guys are going to want to hear about. I thought it'd be suited perfect for our guest today. We're going to be talking with a good friend of ours, Loren Coleman. He's one of the world's leading cryptozoologists. In 1960, he started his field work, and after years pursuing cryptozoological mysteries, he began writing. He's the author of numerous books on cryptozoology, including Bigfoot, The True Story of Apes in America, and Mothman and Other Curious Encounters. Coleman is the founder and director of the International Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine. And you can find more information about that at cryptozoologymuseum.com. We'll have a link up to that on our site. Loren Coleman can be found on Twitter at CryptoLoren and on his blog, cryptozoonews.com. His new book, Mothman, Evil Incarnate, is out and available. And with all this hubbub and talk that's going on, especially in Chicagoland area with some kind of large winged creature, I thought it'd be good to step up and talk to the man with the plan who seems to always have his finger on the pulse of society and the cryptozoological news. Loren, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us again.
Well, it's great to be here. I guess we're getting through the winter together.
Yes, finally making it through this. Now, has there been, during the winter months, are there many sightings of these winged creatures, these Mothman-like or pterodactyl or bat-like creatures seen in this brutal cold, or do they even know better than to hang around at this time of year?
That's the strange thing. These reports are still oozing out of Chicago. A lot of controversies going on the ground with regard to the Mothman reports, almost more than the ones in the air. There's a lot of conflict between some of the researchers there, and some of the people that are investigating it are actually holding on to the reports and not sharing it with others, and that's what mostly people are talking about this winter.
What a weird world we're a part of. Here we are already investigating fringe science, fringe beliefs, and you would think people would want to work together cohesively to create a great point to prove that what we're investigating, what we're looking into, has substantial meat to it. And people hold on to these keys to this golden imaginary kingdom and refuse to share. Loren, I know that's been big and prevalent in the ghost community, but I guess I was surprised to hear that it's also prevails so much in the cryptozoological areas.
Well, I think it has something to do with the maturity of the field. You see it in ufology, you see it in, the paranormal, parapsychological. And so it's people are feeling their oats in cryptozoology, and now they're beginning to think that this territory is theirs over someone else. It's also very interesting, the timing, as far as the reflection of the chaos and the anger that's coming out of Washington, D.C., really permeating the country. And so, Chicago's not exactly a non-political area. So it's interesting that it didn't happen in West Virginia. There was kind of reports, and other researchers would go down there and investigate. But all of a sudden in Chicago, there's researchers from Milwaukee, who aren't allowed to come into Chicago and investigate the cases, and it's just getting ridiculous.
That is
I'm
crazy.
Luckily, I'm over in Maine, and I get the reports from other people, and I'm investigating them long distance, and I'll go to Chicago and I'll talk to some people, but I'm not making a big deal about it. In my book, the new Mothman book, I really overviewed the whole situation and looked at the sightings in terms of the zoology and the psychology behind them, which what I think in terms of Chicago is that almost everything that's being seen that's unknown, whether it's a kite, a balloon, a Mothman-like creature, somebody's owl that's in a tree that they're seeing. Those are all being labeled as Mothman. So it's getting to be very crazy as far as looking at the real facts and figures of it.
People, I'm surprised by that. People can't tell the difference between a kite and an owl and these Mothman-like creatures. I mean, the Mothman-like creatures aren't like 2-foot-tall owls, right? These beings, these winged beasts, seem to have a much bigger stature.
Absolutely. The real Mothman reports from the 60s tend to be 6 to 7 feet tall. If you get headlights of a car or some kind of other form of lighting, their eyes glow back red. Well, these Chicago reports, for one thing, you have to look at the witnesses. The witnesses in Chicago are urban witnesses who know nothing about animals. In general, an owl to them looks like a crow, looks like a hawk. So I'm very suspicious of the eyewitnesses, their knowledge of animals and birds and everything. Even a bat, the difference between a bat and an owl is just the knowledge base is not there. The other thing that I'm finding is that if you go deeper into investigating the Chicago reports, what does everybody else do when they're investigating human crimes? They go to the CCTV, the cable, the ATM videos. Nobody's doing that. Nobody's looking, some of these investigators that want to say, I know the real witness, I have the real files, but they're not taking the step further and looking at real factual evidence. They're just listening to people and they're saying, well, I'm going to put these dots on the map and it looks like we may have something here. But there's not real on-the-ground research that's going on.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we've talked to a few researchers on air and off air, and that's been one of the questions that I've mentioned. I said, with the sightings and there are cameras everywhere, are we accessing these cameras? And it's usually met with the same kind of, well, they're not real forthcoming with letting us have that, and it's security issues and this and that. And I think, there's got to be somebody that's willing to at least review them on their own. And if they see something, just let me know. Alert me to this, right? I mean, that seems like investigation, 101.
Right. There are a couple of pictures that actually have been taken because, of course, the fallback is, well, everybody's got cell phones, so where are all the pictures? A couple of pictures that have been taken, one of them looks like a long-distance shot of an airplane landing at O'Hare Airfield, and another looks like one of those, somebody's fake kite that's up in the sky. So even those haven't turned out to be much. And I push back and say, just like you did, these cameras are everywhere. If you have an assassination, if you have somebody mugging someone else, you don't have to watch TV to know that you go to the cameras, go to the tapes. Everybody has these surveillance tapes all over. Let's go look at them. Nobody's doing that. And they haven't involved the local police either. There's no formal police reports. The newspaper articles that have been published are ones talking about the researchers saying there's something there, but it's not regular individuals going to a paper and saying, hey, I saw this. So there's that middleman process that's getting involved that's really making this pretty foggy as the Mothman reports themselves.
Do you think people are reticent to go to the police and report these things because they're going to be mocked, or maybe the police just don't care and won't even show up?
Well, I think maybe in the 50s and the 60s, whenever there was only a few people that were coming forth. But nowadays, everybody's talking about monsters, creatures, cryptozoology, X-Files, all these TV shows. So everybody's aware that it's kind of common that these things are being seen, and there's not as much ridicule. Sure, there's going to be some people that, they'll lose a partner or they'll be laughed at work or whatever, but they feel like they can help their case more if, I'm talking now, let's say, for instance, Bigfoot, if they go to the local sheriff's department or the local police, what seems to be missing in these Mothman cases, these are individual eyewitnesses that are speaking to one or two individuals that are putting themselves out as the only investigator, and they're kind of skipping the step of going to the law enforcement and getting real, credible investigations going.
I wonder, though, do you think that might be a double-edged sword with the popularity of these things? Are police stations, MUFON and all, are they getting more and more fake and disingenuous accounts because more and more people are, mocking it or think it's funny? I wonder if that is kind of causing more dismay in the field.
Well, we know there's more fakes. We know that there's more. Part of the popularity for Mothman, these reports in Chicago, isn't so much the quality of the reports, but the quantity. Excuse me. In other words, is it really important to have report number 55 to put on my map? Is it important to have report number 60 to log down? Or is it more important to have a high-quality 10 or 12 reports where we have the details, we know who it is, we know where it was, we can look at evidence? It's almost becoming a game of numbers, and people are more interested in putting a little check mark next to another report, another case for my list, and they're really ignoring whether or not this is a high-quality case.
That is strange. And I guess that's just the way it is. People watch what they watch on TV. They get the very bare minimum of how a real investigation goes, and then they set themselves or call themselves an investigator because they're out in fatigues on the weekends, shaking bushes and looking for Bigfoot and forgetting all the protocol that goes into it and, the credible way to interview eyewitnesses. Does it excite you because there's more attention now than ever before, probably in people interested in this field, or is it more upsetting to you because it's really kind of polluted the water?
Well, it is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, let's speak to Bigfoot, for instance. I remember when I started getting involved in the 60s, and there was no internet, there were letters, and so when people used the word expeditions, they meant 6-7 weeks in a wilderness area really looking for things. Move ahead to the 90s, the 80s, and you see on the internet if someone with six-pack Joes, if they go out for the weekend, for a 4-day weekend, they put on their camos, they've gone on an expedition. Whether they are successful or whether they don't hear anything, they'll come back, write it all up on the internet, and, Expedition 15, with I heard this unknown animal, and different things like that. So it then lends itself to, like at our museum and when I do my talks and my associates and friends around the country going to conferences and doing these talks, it certainly, as opposed to speaking to 5 or 6 people that we did in the 60s, we get crowds of 100, 300 people, and they are there to get educated. They are there to learn about what are they doing right, what are they doing wrong, and people are coming away educated, and so these situations in cryptozoology are becoming a gateway to learning. So I am excited about that, and I am excited that, Ivan Sanderson, the big cryptozoologist in the 60s that wrote a few books, and I was a friend of his. He once told me in 1965, he said, I can count the number of people that are interested in Bigfoot on one hand, and it's really changed now. There's lots of people interested. There's, as you know, there's lots of reality TV shows, which lends money to the field because there's really no other way. It's documentary films, it's TV, it's a few books. None of us are millionaires. None of us are making a living from this. So at least by having a community of people that are supporting each other, it's going further than it used to be.
What can you tell us about this new flap with this Mothman-like creature? And do you even put this in the same vein as Mothman? Because it sounds to me like more like a large Batman type type character that's going on in Chicago?
Well, I think you have Batman-type reports, you have human-like things seen in the sky, and you do have some Mothman-type situations that are winged creatures. I think it's very much different than the Mothman, the classic Mothman of West Virginia, which was always feathered. The individuals there, the local residents, before the word Mothman was invented by a newspaper headline writer, we had a situation there where the local residents were calling this big bird because they knew it was a bird. They knew it was kind of unknown in that area, and it had some frightening behaviors, chasing people and picking up and killing dogs and things like that. The ones in the sightings, let me just comment that they're sightings really, of the situation that's going on in Chicago are, such a mishmash of probably 6 different things going on. I can't even really conceptualize it as one figure. There's not one creature being seen. It's almost as if, kind of like the New Jersey Devil. If you see anything weird in New Jersey, it's called the Jersey Devil. I think the same thing is going on in Chicago. If you're a little scared, if it's kind of foggy and dark and in the shadows, then that's got to be the Mothman. Somebody decided at some point, as opposed to calling it a devil bird or a phantom or something like that, they used the word Mothman because it was more sexy or something. So everything that's being seen that's unknown in Chicago right now for really since spring of last year of 2017 into this year is being called Mothman, and I think that's disingenuous. I don't think that Mothman's there. I don't think that this creature even looks like Mothman. It's not as big, and it's not all the same one. So I'm hoping that despite this territorial political stuff that's going on, a bunch of people there will sit down and put their heads together and say, let's critically look at these reports and throw out the shaft, and keep the wheat, keep what's going on here that's real, and look at the facts. And the facts will show that there's not that much going on in Chicago, other than it's now become a psychological, scary story that it's almost like a Slender Man that's become real, and it's
right.
called Mothman.
And this is you think this is more along the lines of just urban legend or kind of feeding the frenzy, and I'm sure that's bringing out a bunch of false witnesses. I mean, with all the witnesses that have come forward, have you read many accounts that you feel, there's something to this? They saw something. I really do believe they saw something, as opposed to this just sounds like somebody's mocking us.
Well, the 60 or so accounts that I've read, I think 6 might be creatures that are bigger than normal that are still unknown. But all of the rest, I think, are people trying to jump on the bandwagon, get attention, couples that scare each other by telling a story. It's become a ghost story, urban legend. And once again, I think we have to focus back on this is extremely urban area. And for what they think they're seeing there, it just wouldn't happen. There are a lot of shadows, and there's a lot of scary things that happen in Chicago, but most of them don't have anything to do with Mothman.
What do you think was, you said that it's weird that there's kind of this strange political environment that's going on. Are there heavier sightings of cryptozoological creatures during these moments of kind of angst and weirdness, in our country or around the world?
Oh, yeah. I think there's a real linkage sometimes between, and you can, we're in a time which everybody, when they're right in the middle of it, can talk about it. But if you look back historically, there's been times of assassination, there's been times of political upheaval whenever strange creatures have been seen, and it almost mixes in as far as having the problem of, is this about how people in society are feeling about society, or are people actually finding and looking at these creatures? So it did happen. I mean, if you look at what occurred in 1967 when the Patterson-Gimlin film was taken, that was October of 67. And if you look at 67, 68, in that time, Vietnam, JFK being assassinated, Martin Luther King, there was a lot going on politically that were really stirring up people. And in the midst of that, almost as a relief to reality, and believe it or not, Bigfoot was more real than people trying to deal with, so-and-so getting assassinated or Nixon coming into office or Watergate. A lot of those things seemed politically hard for people to take in and understand, whereas Bigfoot was much more grounded.
All right. Now, in your new book, you're, kind of tackling the Mothman, Evil Incarnate, and it reads kind of like a companion to John Keel's The Mothman Prophecies. So walk me through this, and I know you've written about Mothman and other creatures like this before, but kind of walk us through what you're doing and introducing with the new book.
Well, the new book, of course, follows. In 2002, I wrote my first Mothman book, Mothman and Other Curious Encounters. When the movie came out, Sony Screen Gems came to me and they said, "We hear you're writing a book on Mothman. Could you speed it up, please? We have a movie coming out." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And they told me this was in 2001. And this was even before 9/11, and that was an interesting time in and of itself. And they had decided to do this new Mothman movie, and nobody had really tackled it with a feature film before. So I wrote my book on Mothman. I told about the case. I told about other cases like Flatwoods and about John Keel, and really a cryptozoological book where I was looking at the cases. Well, then what happened after that book came out in 2002, along with the movie, and I actually did 400 radio interviews for Sony Screen Gems about the movie the month the movie came out. So besides being exhausted from so many radio interviews, I actually started finding that different than when people talk about having a Bigfoot sighting, the Mothman tended to carry along with it some scary baggage. Even in the interviews, electronic problems would happen, light bulbs would break over my head during the interviews. There was lots of strange stuff that seemed scary and beyond the normal. When I talk about lake monsters and Bigfoot, all of those kinds of things don't usually happen. And then I started noticing that people were dying connected. The week that the movie came out, lots of brothers and sisters of eyewitnesses in Point Pleasant started reporting that their relatives were dying. The executive producer of the movie died. Within a couple of years, Mark Pellington, who's very well known for his MTV videos and Arlington Road, he did the Mothman Prophecy. His wife got a mysterious illness and died at the age of 42. So I started noticing that a lot of people connected with Mothman were dying, and I already knew about the different curses associated with movies like Poltergeist, Exorcist, and everybody would talk about those as the curse of such and such a movie. And I dug into that and found out, well, yeah, maybe there was 4, 5, 6 people associated with these movies that died. Well, I started collecting the names of the people who were dying connected to Mothman, and I quickly got to 60-some people. Then I got to 80. Well, for this book, I collected them all, and I have 101 names of people for the Mothman death curse that are some way associated with the Mothman movie.
What?
So there was, yep. And it was, people that were young. For instance, the man that did the illustration for my Mothman Curious Counters book, his son committed suicide soon after the book was, published. So it was young people, it was old people, a lot of people that back when I was doing this, when I was 30 years old, I noticed they were dying, and I thought they were dying at old people, 61 years old. Well, I have a different perspective on age now. That was young.
Right.
They were young. They were young people that were dying. But like a name that a lot of people don't know anymore, Fred Freed, who was a documentary filmmaker for NBC News, he and John Keel were developing a whole, what they called white paper exposing different things. He was working on a white paper with John Keel on the Mothman. Well, he was living in New York, an apartment and all of that. His maid came into his room and found him dead on his bed in his 50s. And so I just kept coming across those. And that seems to be the more important part, the legacy of Mothman. John Keel would talk about, these funny phone calls and these mysterious interactions with some of his psychic friends related to Mothman, predictions that the Pope was going to be assassinated, and even he knew about the bridge collapsing through the dreams that some of his friends were having of seeing floating Christmas packages in a river, and that did come true. So that almost seemed more important to me than the actual sightings of the creature. It was this whole psychological and fear and dread that kept coming in the wake of the Mothman stories.
Well, did that start to make you sweat? I mean,
well,
it's got to be a little intimidating.
It's only after I wrote the book myself, I kept saying to a lot of interviews in the last 6 years that took me to write this book, this Mothman curse isn't affecting me at all. Well, I looked at it, and yes, it did. A younger brother of mine died during the writing of this book. My mother died. Lots of friends of mine that were associated with helping me had died. I personally wasn't affected. Well, actually, I was in and out of the hospital a lot. So you're so close to it sometimes you don't see that the Mothman curse can actually affect you. But I made it through. I'm not on the death list yet, but it's certainly a very scary phenomena that I'm not a person that gets scared, and I'm not superstitious and all of that. So I just said, give me the facts. I'll write them down. I'll see where this leads me.
Well, maybe we need to change the title of today's episode. Hey, welcome back to Beyond the Darkness with our guest, Loren Coleman. Today we're going to talk about Loren's favorite Easter egg decorations. That's weird, Loren. That's massively disturbing. And do you cover a lot of that in the new Mothman Evil Incarnate book?
Oh, yeah. As opposed to going into details about creatures being seen, I have a whole chapter on John Keel. There's this whole companion where I go through his book, and Michael Winkle, who contributed to my book, goes through every case in Keel's book and looks for the stories behind it. I have the names of all of the people on my numbered 100 death list and give the details of how they died and where they died. So, yes, I go into all of that, and I very systematically look at the legacy of this curse and the phenomena and the psychology, and really stay away from the creature reports that people can actually look in my other book, and I encourage everyone to read John Keel's book at the same time they're reading my book, because he certainly...
oh, my God, is this a dog attack? Are you going to be eaten alive on the radio? Mothman, Get back!
He's usually pretty quiet, so of course this had to happen during a Mothman interview.
Sure.
But Yeah, and I talk about the town of Point Pleasant, which really went down the tubes soon after Mothman came there, and everybody forgot about Mothman. They tried to ignore Mothman, and after the bridge, everybody was almost depressed and in mourning. And then finally, it was only in the last few years that they've actually turned to celebration, the Mothman Festival. It's so you have to really look at some way trying to take away the darkness and turn it into light.
Oof. Wow. Yeah, that's uncanny and chilling. Weird stuff. We're going to go to a break in a few seconds, but first, ladies and gentlemen, let's get our minds off Mothman, and we'll take you to a sunnier place. But first, we've got a little bit of your favorite part of the show. I know you guys love this on Fridays, and please continue to send me your stories. And we want to hear your real encounters, and if you can write them in a nice, clear, concise narrative with plenty of descriptive points so Tim can work on that with the sound effects, we would love to feature them. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Theater of the Mind. The archives are open, and Theater of the Mind is about to begin. This story sent to us from Stephen, the Creeper, and the Kid. My name is Steve. I'm a 40-ish-year-old man. I'm still searching for the meaning of and reason for what happened to me when I was only 6 years of age, when I had a personal encounter, an event that still haunts me to this day. I remember it as though it were just yesterday. It had just turned fall, and Halloween was right around the corner. This has always been my favorite time of year due to the weather change and the overall darkness and mystery that can surround this time of year. We lived in a small, modest home in the Gulf Coast of Florida. The house was situated on a 40-acre plot of land surrounded on all sides by thick, deep forests of pine and cabbage palms. In the center of the 40 acres was a transmission tower that was almost 400 feet high, with bright red lights every 100 feet and a bigger red beacon light on the very top that would blink on and off throughout the day and night as a warning for passing planes. The tower was about 300 feet from the house, and I used to watch the beacon blink on and off every night from the window of my room. A lot of stories surrounded that land and the tower that resided there, mostly grim, and for a young kid like I was, they were downright scary. It was no secret that people had died building and maintaining that tower, even on the day it was torn down. My dad's friends would tell stories of a tragedy that happened a year after the tower was raised. It was October in 1971, and a storm blew in. A lightning storm took out the top beacon light. It had to be fixed immediately or risk a collision with passing planes, which landed at one of 3 different small airports that surrounded the town. The on-call tech and his backup went to the tower to prepare for the ascent for that night's work. The tower was fitted with a lift harness that would pull the technician to the top of the tower, so he wouldn't have to climb all that way up and back down again. The job went as planned until it was time for his descent. 30 feet from the top, the lift winch stopped and refused to move. It left the technician hanging onto the tower with pounds of tools and bulbs attached to him, rain pouring down. The tower was soaked from the storm. He radioed to his helper on the ground, but got no response. Being that high up and in the dark, with the tower lights blocking his view, the technician had no choice but to unhook from the harness and make the climb down without the help of the lift winch. The next few minutes still remain a mystery. Even though the technician on the ground couldn't hear the tower tech's radio transmission, the dispatcher of the company could. A dispatcher always had to be on duty when techs were on the tower, just in case. Once she realized the tower tech's words were not being received by the ground tech, she immediately intervened and tried contacting both techs. Knowing that the tower tech needed both hands for the climb down, she softly asked for his attention over the radio. She did it 6 more times before she got one response. "Help!" And the line went silent. Not knowing which tech spoke these words, she immediately tried contacting both techs at the same time, calling the plant manager at home. The plant manager arrived at the tower almost 20 minutes after the cry for help was issued. He immediately knew something was wrong because both techs were nowhere to be found. He started radioing them like he did all the way to the scene, but still no response. That's when he got out his spotlight and started scanning the tower. Nothing. He could see the harness blowing in the wind about 350 feet up, but no technician was anywhere on the tower, and that's when his stomach began to stir. He lowered the light and started scanning the fields around the tower. About 300 feet from the tower, he saw a man in a hard hat standing, looking down at the ground. He called for the tech, but the tech didn't even budge. He yelled again. Still no response. So he got in his truck and drove toward the tech, never taking his eyes off of him. The field was always perfectly flat, no bumps or ditches except the ones surrounding the fields for runoff. The grass was always trimmed and never over ankle high. He stopped the truck about 25 feet from the technician with his brights and spotlight focused on the tech and surrounding area, just knowing that something bad had happened. He walked quickly toward the soon-to-be unbelievable scene. As the plant manager got closer to the tech, whose back was still shown, but yet never showed acknowledgement toward him, he was now close enough to see that the tech was staring in utter silence at a shallow indentation in the ground. An indentation in the perfect shape of a human figure. Without the presence of a cracked and bloody hard hat laying a few feet from the indentation, you would have never noticed the shallow hole. The plant manager walked to the indentation, squatted down to look closer, right in front of the still paralyzed technician. He pulled out his flashlight and shined it into the hole to find spots of blood inside. He also noticed a drag mark about 1.5 feet wide heading toward the tree line that stood about 200 feet away. As the plant manager followed the drag mark from the indentation, he began to come upon spots of blood and tools covered in blood. This wasn't making any sense to him at all. As he got closer to the tree line, the blood began to become more and more noticeable, but still no body. He was now standing about 8 feet from the tree line. He could see what looked to be the sole of a boot. He was hopeful, but still confused. Maybe the tech fell and, in shock, crawled toward the tree line. Impossible. No one could survive a fall like that, lose that much blood, and make it that far and still have any intact bones in their body. Confused, frustrated, and scared at the sight of what he might find, the plant manager knew he had to make contact with the victim. His light trained on the boot. He took 2 steps and tripped over something, falling hands first onto the blood-soaked drag trail. He immediately grabbed the flashlight and spun around to see that he had tripped over a severed leg. Not just severed, but torn apart. It still had a boot and parts of the pant leg attached. As he got a closer look at the body part, he noticed scratch and tear marks in the jean material and boot. His attention was taken away from the destroyed leg by movement coming from the direction of the tree line and area where the bloody drag line continued. He slowly turned his flashlight toward the noise. He began to shake in terror as he locked onto the pair of dark, red, glowing eyes. Standing on top of the tower tech's chest was a creature about 3 feet tall with dark gray skin covering a slender, muscular body. The head was almost childlike. It had chubby features and fine lips covering 2 rows of bloody, sharp teeth. He could see the veins in the thing's forehead almost pumping with its own heartbeat. It was hairless all the way down to its hands and feet, which were odd in themselves. It had 2 claw-like fingers and a claw-like thumb on each hand and 3 long toes on each foot, with long nails jutting out. As the plant manager tried to pull his gaze away from the creature to get a better look at the victim, the creature dug its long, sharp toenails into the tower tech's chest as if to say, "This one's mine." The plant manager could barely keep focused. Due to his shaking, he hardly noticed the creature stepping backwards. He locked eyes one more time with the creature before it bent down, hooked its claws into the husk of the tower tech's mutilated torso, and drug it off into the woods. But not before giving the plant manager a bloody, toothy grin. The manager hastily backed away in almost reverse sprint, not taking his eyes off the tree line. Once he made it to the other technician, who was now in tears but still not talking, he grabbed the technician and drug him back toward the truck, throwing him in the passenger seat. The manager jumped into the driver's seat and threw it into reverse and backed all the way off the property. Once he made it onto the highway, he radioed for dispatch to call the police to the tower. The plant manager pulled in right behind the police and ambulance. No way would he ever go back there alone. He kept running the night's events through his mind, but they always led to one thing: that horrid creature. How could he explain it? Who would believe him? The ground tech would. He must have seen it. That's why he was still catatonic and his eyes wet from sobbing. The police scoured the fields and wooded area that night and all that next day. They never found the tower technician. As a matter of fact, they never found anything except his truck, which was still strobing its yellow lights. Not one tool on the ground, not one drop of blood. The only thing that remained was a slight indentation about 300 feet from the tower. There was no hard hat. There was no blood. Full reports were taken on the night's events, but accounts were sketchy at best. When the ground tech was finally questioned weeks later in the hospital, he had no accounts of the plant manager even showing up. He said he saw the tower tech fall past the 200-foot mark light of the tower, but never saw him hit. He thinks he may have blacked out and doesn't remember anything else. The only reliable report was given by the dispatcher, who said she called the plant manager at home after hearing someone yell for help, but couldn't be sure who it came from. The plant manager's report was thrown out due to the fact he was either tired or just making up what he saw to cover up the fact that many techs had requested the lift winch to be replaced, and in fact, it may have caused the death of the still missing technician's body. Foul play had never been ruled out. Almost a month after the night's weird events, the plant manager took his own life. Not without leaving a note saying he was haunted by the demons and couldn't live with what haunts him every night. That was the story I was told when I was 6, and it leads to my own personal encounter. The night I was told that story, I went to bed more scared than I'd ever been in my entire life. That night, I wouldn't look at the tower. I slept at the other end of the bed to keep its red glow and the thought of that story from haunting me for the rest of the night. I don't know what time I finally fell asleep or when I woke to have to use the bathroom, but it was late and I had to pee. It wasn't until I was done and walking back to my bed that I noticed that my blanket was half on the bed and pulled under the bed as if something pulled it that way. I continued walking to the bed when I noticed the blanket move, like it was being pulled from underneath. I froze in horror as the story I was told earlier ran through my mind and equated it to the blanket being tugged right now. All I could do was gain enough strength to run out of my bedroom and straight for my parents' room. Once I got into their room, I pushed the door open and jumped onto my mom's side. She rolled over and accidentally pushed me off the bed. I fell to the floor hard. I yelled and clawed my way back onto the bed, waking my dad. He flicked the light on and saw me barely hanging on the side of the bed. I remember him asking me what was going on and why I wasn't in bed. That's when I told them. They didn't believe me, and my mom shunned my dad for letting his friend tell a child of 6 a story like that. Needless to say, I stayed in their bed, but not without incident. I laid on my mom's side of the bed, and she between me and my dad. They immediately fell back to sleep. I stared down the hall toward my bedroom door, and whatever could be under my bed. The next moments will stay with me for as long as I live. I remember waking up on my side facing the hallway toward my bedroom. The only light was coming from my mom's alarm clock, a slight amber glow, and the hallway window, with the light from the property light shining through, creating a rectangular diagonal frame of the window on the hallway floor. The time was 1:35 a.m. I'll always remember that time. I rolled my head and peered down the hallway to a form about 3 feet high. It looked almost human, but was obscured by the hallway light blocking its detail. I blinked again and again, hoping it would disappear, but every time I blinked, my vision got clearer, and the thing got closer. The next time I blinked, it was just on the edge of the light coming through the hallway window. It never broke that plane, it just stood there. It was looking at me. I was frozen in fear and locked onto the figure. As I continued to stare, I could finally know for sure, yes, this thing was looking directly at me. I could just make out a slight red glow in its eyes, dark, fiery red. I felt nothing but fear and the warm tears on my nose and cheeks from my eyes. About that time, a loud snort came from my dad. He was snoring like he always did, but his one blast of his snore woke me from my fearful gaze, and I snapped my head around. When I realized it was just my dad, and I was truly awake, that sent me into a deeper fear. I slowly turned my head toward the thing in the hall, almost half expecting to see it standing right in front of me. But it wasn't. It was gone. I scanned the whole hallway and bedroom. Nothing. It was gone. Or was it even ever there? I finally fell back asleep, but I know it wasn't until around 3 a.m. because I kept scanning the hallway and the clock. That was the last time I remember before being awoken by my mom's alarm at 6 a.m. I had to get ready for school, so I waited for my dad to make his way to the kitchen to make his morning coffee before I could even head to my room. At least with my dad in the kitchen, that would be a little safer than me braving my bedroom alone. As I made my way down the hallway, I stopped at the spot where the thing was standing just hours before. No sign of the thing. I walked past my dad in the kitchen and looked through my bedroom door at my bed. It was still messed up from the night, but something was different. The blanket that I saw pulled under the bed was now pulled out as if it was stuck to something's back as it crawled out from underneath my bed. About that time, my dad said, "Who left the front door open?" Oh my God, I thought as I stared at the slightly open front door. Was it real? I don't know. All I know is it was real to me, and I saw too many signs of it being real. I never saw it again, but I am curiouser as to why it was there. And if it was a thing from the story, or was it a bunch of things that I just pieced together in my actively scared imagination? That night has always stayed in my mind and always will until I find out for sure if it was real and what it wanted from a 6-year-old child. That was the beginning of my fascination and the start of my bewilderment with the paranormal.
Beyond the darkness.
Hey, welcome back to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. Mothman Incarnate. Loren Coleman is our guest today. We're taking a totally different look at this Mothman storyline. You've conveniently blown my mind with this Mothman curse. And now, with the Mothman movie again, how many people have you got it up to that have died kind of in a very quick succession since that movie came out?
Well, we have to start first with the 46 people that died with the bridge. So the 46 people that died, when the bridge collapsed, and then adding all of the other people, it's 101. Actually, in my book, I have a chapter called The Aftermath, Diabolical Demises, Devilish Deaths, and Dastardly Departures. So
So it's a real feel-good book. It's one to gather the kids around the hearth and read from. This is a feel-good book.
Well, you got to be truthful.
No, you do. I understand
that. It's not just about animals that we're going to put our pith helmet on and our boots and go out and find. Sometimes you have to deal with the aftermath, and certainly with Mothman, I think the aftermath has been quite sinister. The movie was successful, but it was also sinister, and it was highly symbolic. I deal with what I call the Twilight language, and there seemed to be many different levels. There was lots of in-jokes in the movie, and so it's good to read my book or, read somebody else's book that has some of these insights. Nobody does. But anyway, about what's talking about Easter eggs, the whole cute little thing nowadays is to put Easter eggs in all these movies so that people can be surprised when they find out that, that Easter egg in there was about this other movie or this other thing. Well, the Mothman Prophecies did that a lot, For instance, one of the people, Alan Bates played a professor named Leek, L-E-E-K, and that was Keel spelled backwards. Richard Gere played a character that was Keel's birth name. And so there's lots of little things in there. There's a UFO pen name that's snuck in there. Lots of different things have a different level in that movie. And it really goes back to a lot of these eyewitnesses, which they were saying they were seeing something, but it was almost as if they were seeing into another parallel universe. And part of the reaction of these individuals is they felt suicidal, they felt in danger, they were in fear for their lives. I interviewed, of course, Keel was a good friend of mine. I interviewed him a lot about this, and he felt he was not a ufologist. He wasn't a cryptozoologist. He actually called himself a demonologist. So he felt like the Mothman case was more about demons, more about the dark side than it was about anything that most people go into it thinking it's some kind of new cryptozoological species.
And where do you put it? Do you put this creature as a cryptozoological creature, or do you believe that this fits more into a kind of I don't want to say mythical, but kind of metaphysical creature?
Well, I think it's a Rorschach test. I do feel that what was originally seen in 66 and 67 was a possible giant unknown creature that was more like a giant owl. I have a friend, well, he's actually died too, Mark Hall, who did a lot of studies on Mothman, and he called it Big Hoot, kind of a play on Bigfoot, but it was Bighoot. And Big Hoot was a type of giant owl, and he felt that, and I feel, that some of those original reports were undiscovered, new kind of owl. There actually were reports of owls that were over 4 feet tall in the Ice Age of Cuba. And there's over 150 years of the Native Americans in that section of West Virginia who have seen these giant owls. And so it could be that. So that's how it began. And a lot of reports around the country might be these giant owls, but just so happens in Point Pleasant, like I said earlier, a newspaper person gave the name Mothman to it. And because of Keel's involvement, because the way it really turned in, and I think that the Mothman process is a cryptozoology's version of In Cold Blood. John Keel, very much like Truman Capote, decided to go to this little community and made a nonfiction book that reads like a horror story, a fiction story, but everything really did happen there. And because of that, I think that the more distance people got from the actual interactions with the creature, the aftermath was something diabolical, was something more dangerous. And that's what I think. Does the creature itself then turn into a demon or turn into a urban myth or a supernatural creature? No, not necessarily. But the way people are experiencing it becomes much more parapsychological. And that in this book at least, what interests me, because I have a background in that field too, and I think to look at these individuals and how they have survived Mothman almost in many ways is more interesting than their 30-second viewing of this creature.
What did you think personally of the movie? I found it was a little flat and disappointing, but as somebody who is involved in this and in the research, do you feel that they conveyed a very fun, entertaining flick, or do you feel that they kind of missed the point?
Well, I think, having worked with the people, and Mark Pellington had this Arlington Road, which was a conspiracy theory movie background, and I agree with you. When I first saw the movie, I figured it was not going to be a success. I thought it fell on its face. There was no creature that was really seen except, in a long distance. And Richard Gere, he's wonderful that he wants Tibet to be free. I'm all for that. But as an actor, I've always found Richard Gere just kind of doesn't move the movie along. He's not a Bruce Willis. It's not an action film. And I'd rather have it had more action and actually would have been more thoughtful, even in the dialogue. But then I've seen it now, 10, 20 times, and each time I see a different
Wait a minute.
level of it.
So it's a movie you didn't like a whole lot, but now you've seen it about 20 times. Maybe that's your Mothman curse. You're saved because it's like the movie The Ring. You just keep watching it and you're okay. It's the minute you stop, you're done.
Well, that's a good theory. So there are some things in it that I didn't see the first time, and I've enjoyed it more. The one thing I must say that absolutely made me the most happy when I saw it is seeing John Keel's name up on the screen. To know that a friend of mine finally made a little money from all of the work that he did.
Right.
Unfortunately, it came so late in his life, and I document that in his book. He lived a really miserable last 10 years of his life. He only made $80,000 on the book, which is not a lot of money. I mean, from the movie. And he didn't have any place to spend it. He paid off his debts, and by the end of his life, he didn't have any teeth, and he was eating junk food next to his desk and dropping them on the floor. He had a car that had 4 flat tires in a garage in New York, and was living a miserable life, even though he had a very successful movie from his book. So I'm hoping that my 40th life, my cryptozoological life, won't end that way. I mean, fame is only one thing, but as my friend Jerry Clark said, what's fame without fortune? Most of us can be well known, but we got to have money to pay the bills.
Well, I'll tell you what,
you doesn't often happen.
You got to jump on this quick. They just announced that Zachary Quinto from the Star Trek movies, who plays Leonard Nimoy's Mr. Spock character, is reviving a new version of In Search Of. So you better get on it and let them know you're available as a specialist and a consultant there.
Well, I don't know. I think they would have. I was actually the senior series consultant for the revival in 2002. So nobody knocked at my door for this one. There is a little thing that happens in the field in Hollywood. If you have too much white hair, they think you're too old. But, I am available. I am a consultant. It's for the History Channel. I've been on there a lot. Maybe I'll be able to get involved.
Yeah, I would reach out to them if I were you, because they certainly need somebody that's going to bring something credible to the show, and you're the guy for the cryptozoological aspects of this, no doubt. Let's.
Thank you, Dave.
Well,
that
certainly.
Nice to say.
Well, we've always enjoyed your visits and live at our speaking events and over the radio. You've got great information. You do it with great humor and wisdom, and you could see that this is something you care about. This isn't a weekend warrior hobby for you. This is something that you're passionate about. And let me ask you about that. I mean, all these years involved in this, and do you believe that there is any real concrete evidence towards any of these creatures that you started investigating that you could say, you know what, now this is something I can hang my hat on. This is something, whether everybody else or mainstream science wants to believe, I believe this is truly indicative that these creatures or this creature specifically exists?
Oh, certainly. I mean, in 2003, I created the whole International Cryptozoology Museum, and the mainstays of those cryptids that I think will be discovered in the next 25 years, orang pendek, the little ape-like creature that's in Indonesia. I think there's enough evidence for that. I think there's going to be some sea serpents that are discovered. There's some lake monsters that are out there. Those are what I call the cryptid celebrity, and there are a few of those. But there's lots of little things, new animals. I mean, the success stories, new tapir was discovered in 2013, a new orangutan species, because in addition to all of the evidence of the footprints, the hair samples, the fecal materials for the land mammals, the new piece of testimony that's really coming to play is DNA. And DNA is proving that some of these creatures that were misunderstood actually exist. And so there are some new animals. I mean, everybody talks about the okapi, the mountain gorilla, the giant squid. Those were the success stories 100, 150 years ago. Well, there's new success stories almost every week. There was a brand new songbird found, a new species found in Central Park, New York. There was a new turtle that was found in the Pearl River in Mississippi. So even in the United States that everybody thinks has been overexplored and over-discovered, there's still new animals being discovered in the United States.
Right, but those aren't as sexy as, Batman and Sasquatch and Bat Squatch and all of the rest of these beings. That's what everybody wants to find. It's, oh, great, a new turtle. Oh, okay. Isn't that sad that we're so ho-hum about these new deals? Because I know out of Papua New Guinea, they find 10 or 12 new species of something every year, and people are just like, whatever. When you find a double-headed dragon, then give me a call, but who cares if it's another turtle dove? Let's get into something really dramatic and creepy. It's funny how people are, but it's kind of like that with the space race too. People just stopped caring about what we were doing and what we were capable of. But these big ones, they're the ones that are they're the meat and the bread and butter of this whole
those are the
subscience,
and that's,
right?
I think in the age of Twitter and breaking news, I mean, you can't turn on CNN or Fox or anything without every episode being breaking news. There's a adrenaline rush that exists in our society now, so everybody wants a Bigfoot to be discovered tomorrow. It doesn't happen that way, but Well,
are you keeping up with these weird news stories regarding the humanzee, and that there have been some successful crossbreeding of humans and chimpanzees?
Yeah, I've read a lot about that. I'm still waiting for the evidence. I mean, it's a friend of a friend told me this kind of story. Still, there's even though there's marginal citations in some scientific papers, we're still not seeing pictures. We're not seeing DNA samples, and of course, the picture they showed with the mass media article was poor old Oliver, which was the chimpanzee from the 60s that was trained to stand upright with a chain around his neck. And so that, if they're using that picture over and over again as a human Z and talking about gorillas mating with humans, maybe it does happen, but I think we need to see more evidence.
Yeah, I've joked with Tim for years about this. What's going to get us first? Is it the uprising of the artificial intelligence, or is it going to be zombie apocalypse, or now are we going to have the real Planet of the Apes to worry about?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, because some of those books have come true.
And this, the whole idea that there was so many different weird experiments that have taken place in the United States, experiments that government officials and declassified papers have come out and proven. Do you think that some of these encounters and some of these creatures that we have seen that maybe are no longer visible, or are not being witnessed, were nothing more than just, these science experiments gone wrong? Or do you think that there's something more to that?
Well, I think there are a lot. I know from my work with Tom Slick, the Texas oil millionaire, I've written some biographies about, who died in a plane crash in '62. He had a secret laboratory in San Antonio that was all set up. As soon as they discovered and captured a Yeti, he was going to sneak it into the country and experiment and see, because he was interested in baboons for medical experiments, and he thought Yeti would be the best kind of lab rat you ever found. So I do think that there's a lot more truth to that, and it is kind of interesting how through science fiction movies, through all of these stories, and through these kind of interesting releases, we're getting ready. We're being prepared. Shape of Water, for instance, maybe that's some kind of hint that something else was going on. And of course, all of the release of, the whole UFO releases that were just happened with Bigelow at the Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, what, $22 million? I'd love to have 1/10 of that for my budget for the Cryptozoology Museum. It's just amazing how much money is kicked around by some of these people for their own pet projects, which we hear about 10, 20, 50 years later. So there's something else going on. It's just we have not imagined yet what they're doing.
Oh, I think we've imagined it. We're just putting it back in our brains because nobody wants to face what's really going on out there and what might be forthcoming in humanity's future. Getting back into the evil incarnate aspect of this Mothman and kind of delving into the book, throwing the term evil incarnate around is a pretty hefty proposition. Why do you include that as part of this storyline? Is it the sex sells, the sizzle is what's going to get you?
No, I think that I wanted to push people's brain beyond the way that, people tend to think Mothman is this cutesy little creature that flies around in the sky and doesn't affect people. But when I talked to Linda Scarberry, who was one of the first witnesses to Mothman, she said that John Keel came to her house and interviewed her, and she was so scared after he interviewed her that she put crosses on every wall in her house. She felt there was such an evil around. And is that from Mothman? Is that because of Mothman? Is it in the aftermath? Do the researchers cause the evil? I don't know. But, with Charles Manson, of course, is the one that a lot of people associate evil incarnate with the term. And I just felt that Mothman needed to be put in its place as far as being much more evil than people wanted to acknowledge.
The concept or construct or the energy that seems to surround it, where do you really put that on?
Oh, definitely the energy. I think that Mothman, the creature, is not so much evil. It's the aura around it, the experience that people have, the deaths associated with it, the bad luck that people feel that they trip into whenever a Mothman comes into their lives. I oftentimes do interviews like this with the print media people, and I say, don't blame me if you go out to your car and your tires are flat. That was just Mothman. We're talking about Mothman, and Mothman, just the mere fact of talking about it causes some kind of evil, dark energy to come into your life for a while. And then we have to be careful. You and I today, when we get done with this interview, we have to do whatever your belief system needs to do to rebalance yourself, because opening the gates to Mothman is a death curse for some people.
Well, there goes my listenership. Thanks, Loren. Jesus Christ. All right, folks, let's all grab hands at the end of this episode. We're going to sing a little Kumbaya. That might be the most chilling comment ever uttered on my radio show in 12 years of doing this show. Yeah, pretty much, just let me go on record as saying, Dave, your audience is screwed. Just talking about it, just hearing the term Mothman. Boy, did you ever extend it out and look at how many people may have died after leaving the movie theater of weird deals? I wonder if there's any kind of news stories like that.
None that I've heard. I think what's intriguing is once in a blue moon, you hear about people shooting each other in theaters. None of it was Mothman. It happens to be like stupid movies like, Trainwreck. But I don't know about Mothman and that, but that would be a hard stat to really follow.
Now, for
anyway,
the skeptics,
you're the one that wait a second. You're the one that used to have conferences on the Queen Mary.
Right.
I remember that was a spooky place to be.
Right, but the difference is you don't say the name Queen Mary, Queen Mary, Queen Mary, and a ship comes through your mirror and kills you, Loren. You're telling me people just talking about Mothman causes problems. Well, we're trying to keep it light. You said by taking the darkness and the stigma out of it, maybe that'll keep it going. So we'll just keep having fun with this episode as we roll out the death knell for our listeners, apparently. Yeah, well, that is something. I mean, there's no other cryptozoological creature that really kind of has that connection, is there? I mean, you've got Chupacabra, the goat sucker, but really, I mean, unless you're a goat, you're pretty much okay, right? I mean, this doesn't seem to impact. Right. There are no other creatures that impact people in this way, or are there? And I'm just not familiar with it. And if there are, should we talk about it?
I've written down through the years a couple times people have said, if you see Bigfoot, you'll die. And they always point back to Ivan Sanderson interviewing the Chapman family in British Columbia who saw Bigfoot in 1941. And then 6-7 years later, they died when they all drowned trying to cross a river up there. And it wasn't the media. It wasn't connected. And there is no Bigfoot curse. I talked a lot about this with John Green, a Bigfoot researcher, and he thought that was all baloney, that people just were making that up. And I, too, I think that people say things like that because they're just trying to make it more sexy or thrilling. It's much different with Mothman. There's absolute darkness and fear and actual evidence that you can point to. So-and-so did this, connected with Mothman. He's the one that produced the music for the movie that came out in 2010. He died. He died in his music studio, and he was a young man.
But couldn't it be said, right, I mean, if we're looking at it from the time the first, the bridge collapsed to today, there's 101 names that you found associated with this. If I looked at anything that took place, like the TV show Planet of the Apes, as we were joking around about the Human-Z, if we looked at that, starting with the movies through, couldn't we say that there's a curse? I'm willing to bet I could find 101 people that have died since the 60s and the Planet of the Apes movies first came out, starting with Rod Serling and Roddy McDowell and everything. Couldn't we say that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are going to die from old age. A lot of people are going to die statistically. But it's kind of like those witnesses that saw JFK and then all of the studies, they seem to have a statistical increase, in deaths. I've tried to do that with the other movies. I've done it with The Exorcist. I've done it to do a comparative, with the Mothman. And it keeps coming up that Mothman seems to have something different. But I would be delighted if you spent the next 6 years, like I just did, and study the Planet of the Apes and come up with 100 names. I would read that book of yours.
I will do it. I will do it. Okay. The Curse of the Apes. The Ape Nation rises.
Well, you also have a lot of other movies now, too.
Right.
There's been so many Planet of the Apes movies. I mean, that's the thing with the Poltergeist movies. I started looking into that and found out there were 3 movies. So you had increased your number of people. Mothman,
and then you had a Poltergeist TV series and then a reboot of the movie. So, yeah, you've got a lot of possibilities.
Right, exactly. So, anyway, it's been interesting. And I'm in many ways, other than these radio interviews, with friends like you,
hey, stop calling me friends. Your friends seem to have bad luck when they talk about Mothman. We're just associates who kind of know each other once in a while, Loren.
I'm really happy to be done writing these Mothman books.
I bet.
I'm giving it a break from the research because I've got a general cryptozoology book to do, and if I could concentrate on that and forget about Mothman for a while, I would feel a lot happier.
Lighten the mood. The Archie comics, they've crossed over with the Punisher and Kiss. Maybe you should have Archie meets Bigfoot. Just to kind of lighten up the thing, lighten up the whole storyline here. There are a lot of different... go ahead.
X-Files, too.
Right.
The X-Files tends to do that, too. I think humor is very good in this field, and a lot of people try to be too serious, and I really do appreciate and around Mothman, the funnier it gets for me, the better.
Good. We'll keep that in mind. Are there, now you talk about the celebrity beasties. Are there any new cryptids that are starting to be reported that have, caught your attention?
Well, I don't know if you have caught the news recently. There's this digital or video game called Monster Hunter World. And they've come out with a prize out of England.
Right. Capcom. 50,000 pounds,
Capcom. Yeah, pounds. And on there, they put a couple creatures that we're still looking. I mean, it's like the hound killer or something, I don't know. So they've almost invented new cryptids to go on the list. Because they do Sasquatch and lake monsters and different things like that. But right in the middle of it, they did some kind of stranger, unknown creature. And so I think people are going to be looking deeper into that one to try to make the money. It'll be interesting to see what their standards are for proof to get the money. But it's happened before that, people come away and they understand it was just a gimmick.
Loren, what is the hook with the black cat sightings, these large, like, panther sightings? To me, that doesn't seem so far removed. I mean, there are, large black cats that known to roam different parts of the United States. Can't they move on? Can't they migrate if they're sensing, global warming or changes? Would that be so weird? And why do they fit it into the cryptozoological realm?
Well, let me back you up a little. There are not any black cats that roam the United States. All of the black cats that are seen in the continental United States are cryptids. There are no mountain lions that have ever been melanistic. And now the United States government just declared that all the eastern panthers, which is another name for mountain lion, the ones that are the same color as a deer, don't exist anymore. So they're saying that. So if you see any kind of mystery cat in the eastern United States, you're supposedly supposed to go into a mental hospital because you've seen something that doesn't exist. So there are jaguars in South America and Central America that occasionally go into New Mexico, Arizona, but not all of those. We know which ones are which. There's numbers on them and there's collars and they're tracked real well. Jaguars are very heavy. These black creatures, black mystery cats that are seen, are always thin. They're very aggressive, and they attack people and livestock and cars and all kinds of things like that. Those are all cryptozoological. And they feel so familiar because actually they are the most often seen cryptid in North America. When people start talking to me about Bigfoot and they say, well, isn't Bigfoot the most common, most popular creature being seen? And I say, no, it's actually these black panthers or black mystery cats. They're seen so often that people take it for granted that they're a known animal. They aren't known. Maybe, I know around Detroit, nothing against Detroit, but for really since the 50s, there's been spotty reports of black panthers around there so much that some people have tried to explain them away as released black leopards. Black leopards do exist in Africa. They do exist in India, but they do not exist even as a feral animal, as a wild population in the United States. But yet Black Panthers, which I guess is going to be one of the most popular Marvel films coming out, are seen the most often in the United States.
Are there any real attacks associated with these, or are they just these phantom cats?
Well, Phantom Panthers is I coined the phrase Phantom Panther in the 1960s when I was writing about them, because even though the attacks were very real, and I would interview and take pictures of individuals who had their chest all scratched up or their arms scratched up, they always were phantoms because they never could be caught. They disappeared quickly, and the cats would just seem to melt into the wilderness. But they are ones that attack. They attack livestock, they attack dogs, and they do attack people. There's occasional reports that people shoot these Black Panthers, but then by the time we get there, usually southern states, the individuals who shot them felt that they actually had broken a law, some kind of, endangered species law, and they burn the bodies or they bury them. And so that seems to be what goes on a lot with these kinds of cases. It's usually rural people that are less sophisticated, who get very scared very quickly after they kill them and try to dispose of the evidence.
Well, Loren, it's always great catching up with you. Mothman, Evil Incarnate is out and available now. As a matter of fact, if you go to darknessradio.com and click on our Killer Deals link, you'll see the book linked right there for easy access, so you can order the book. And please do us a favor and do Loren a favor. When you buy the book, make sure that you rate the book. Give it 5 stars and tell everybody how much you love it. If you have anything negative to say, just shut up. Just shut up. But if you like it, put up 5 stars and let them know that you love it, and keep this information out there. Thank you again, Loren. It's always a pleasure catching up with you.
Oh, it's great talking to you, Dave.
That's it for this week. We'll be back next week with brand new episodes of the best in paranormal talk radio. You've been listening to Beyond the Darkness.